Jason, great to be with you finally. I know we worked a long time to set this up, but most good things are worth waiting for, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. So thank you for joining us.
Likewise, Scott, I will talk wellness with a friend, a client, a colleague, anytime.
And I was thinking that probably you and I think, informally agreed we're not going to go too much into data today. In the wellness world, you are one of the reason I respect you is you're really evidence-based. You respect the data. You're one of the first ones to offer up information. And as you know, I'm a data guy too. But we'll quickly kind of have people sticking needles in their eyes if we go there too far. But anyway, it's great to be able to have a conversation with somebody who's so well versed and knows all this. So you're a wellness coach, and so I think that just begs the question. We throw wellness around like it's one of those words like we know what it means, right? Like I'm going to Google something, or we talked about earlier, just about I'm going to Zoom at something. Words take on different meanings over time. So we think about the word wellness. Maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of part one of what do you view wellness and kind of what your definition is, and then for the listeners or the viewers, what might be the signs that our wellness is at risk that we're not even aware of?
I think a simple way to think of wellness is that it's a newer word for health. So much so that many people can't decide between the two. For example, I'm certified by the National Board for Health and Wellness Coaching. So they're implying that it's two different things, yet people who are certified by them, some will call themselves a health coach and some will call themselves a wellness coach, and they're doing the same work. I think I prefer the word wellness to describe what I'm saying is a lot like the word health for two reasons. The word health, at least to me in my lifetime, has had a connotation of something like the absence of sickness. And one thing the word wellness has largely is a connotation of, it's not just the absence of sickness, but sort of the fullness of wellness, of which I'll get into my second idea around this. I think the word health has connotations that go back to the centuries old body, heart, mind schism. So health is largely thought of as a physical quality. And another thing that I like about the word wellness is you almost don't need to say holistic wellness. The word wellness has a little bit of a holistic nature to it. And I think I stumbled upon this a minute ago. I would describe wellness as something like, I don't even know if this is an English word in the dictionary, as aliveness. And it's something like your happiness and your health fully turned on, kind of thing.
So there's a psychological, emotional component to it beyond the health metrics or biomarkers that we think about. Is that where you're going?
Right, and I think with the rise, unfortunately, with the rise in anxiety and depression as two key markers, people experiencing anxiety and depression increasingly would say, my health is poor, or I'm sick. And one thing we know is that certain behaviors or aspects of lifestyle, they don't choose. Exercise being a poignant one. The same exercise has been proven to reduce anxiety, reduce cardiovascular disease, reduce dementia, and increase longevity. So I think that's definitely a way I think of wellness is more integrated. And then even something that tends to affect, we tend to think of as affecting more the emotional and mental end of the spectrum, something like the quality of our relationships is proven to reduce cardiovascular disease, reduce dementia, and even short of reducing sickness, improve quality of life with things like better quality of sleep and things like that. So yeah, at this point, I use words like physical, emotional, and mental when it helps to reduce things. But I've almost made it a game to try to avoid using those words as often as I can, because I don't think they point to reality very much. They help us understand some things, but I don't think they reflect our lived experience very much.
Yeah, and they go, I think, between inputs and outputs depending on which one we're talking about, right?
Sure.
So, like so many things around health, which I always kind of say, there's very little about health and wellness that's binary, right? It's all these interdependent factors, and I think that's maybe the part that makes it so hard to put your finger on. It also is the part that when it starts to elude you, can start to feel so overwhelming.
For sure. For sure. I think that leads nicely in the second part of your question. I think the common way most people in our culture start to detect sickness or unwellness is by some sort of a test that's part of mainstream medical culture. So that's a blood cholesterol test, a blood sugar test, having their blood pressure taken, even simply having their weight measured or their waist circumference taken, or things like that. And I think that's interesting because for one reason is that when those tests we can consider relatively insensitive. By the time something is showing up as out of optimal range on those tests, the person's level of function is already significantly away from optimal. There's something I've learned from having conversations with naturopathic physicians. I'm not an expert at this, but some of those other medical traditions have traditions of things like one of the bathroom talk kind of things they'll talk about is like looking at the quality of a person's poop, for example, right? And I think things like that is really interesting because it's less what's the word I want? It's less quantifiable, it's less empirical than something like a blood cholesterol test. But if a person's stools are loose or a person's stools are, they're tending toward something like constipation, that is a sign that the function is off. And that kind of thing happens months, years before something might show up on a more empirical test. They'll look at other subjective things that we can even look at ourselves, but a practitioner might help a person be able to look at, like sleep quality, mood, energy levels, sex drive is another one. These are things that sort of reflect general well-being fairly well, and some of them even having empirical evidence behind them, but aren't really part of the mainstream medical testing structure. So I think that's an interesting. People start to notice those things. They start to notice. I mean, the one that's just huge in our culture, people start to notice, I'm tired. It's diffuse enough that it's not necessarily that helpful in some ways. That said, I think a lot of the low-hanging fruit of what improves wellness is generally present in a person who's experiencing fatigue, and so some action steps are available to them even with that kind of diffuse feedback.
Yeah, because I think so you and I share of many things. We share an athletic background in endurance sport, and that's one of the things I speak to occasionally is you don't realize how tired you are in the weeks following really a long season, until you finally wake up and realize, I didn't know how tired I was 3 and 4 weeks ago until I got untired. And when you're in it, I've got better at it, and probably are the same. I can recognize the signals much earlier now, but at the time I had no clue.
Absolutely.
Right?
I think this, athletes have, an extra sensitivity to their body generally speaking. But this is even true in the general population. Someone can get a certain level of accumulated fatigue from parenting.
Yeah.
And not and consider it now their normal, but then either through a planned vacation or a lucky break of their company decides the business they work for shuts down for 2 weeks or something, and they get some real rest. They get a sense of this is what it feels like to really have energy. And same things with some of those other things, like someone can have poor digestion for quite a long period of time and kind of consider that their normal. And after maybe making some improvements to their eating habits, or making some reducing the amount of stress in their lives, or both of those things, or exercising more, their digestion is working better. They have less gas. Their bowel movements are easier. All of these kinds of things, and they're like, oh, that's what it feels like to have digestion working well. I think that's a very interesting point, Scott. I think since most of us don't grow up in a culture that's sort of teaching us to be attuned to these things, and we grow up in a culture that teaches us to sort of to focus on school and work, and sort of pushing with those things, it's very easy to have some early signs of fatigue, or some early signs of poor digestion, or some early signs of more negative moods, and just consider that part of life and kind of move on. It's usually something more dramatic that gets a person's attention to say, something is off here, and I probably should start doing something about it.
Yeah, it's one of those. Unfortunately, it's kind of left to trial and error and experience, and until you've got enough experience with it, it's hard to recognize that you're in it, let alone the early indications, right? So, and I'll just go back to you. You touched on something that again I speak to occasionally. I've promised to do at some point a program on poop, because of all the biomarkers we have available to us, that's the one thing that we don't leverage in medicine.
I actually, it's funny, and we would all get a chuckle out of it, but it really is, and there it is. It can be more empirical than people think of, in the sense of trying to remember the things a naturopath would typically look at. It's whether it floats or doesn't float, sort of color. It can gravitate toward all the way to almost a black, all the way down.
So for listeners, floating is better than sinking.
Floating is better than sinking, yeah. We're looking for sort of like a earthy brown, not like a blackish, or also not like a orange yellow. We're looking for like a earthy organic smell, not like disgusting. And really, those are the three that I can think of. I might be missing something.
Yeah, well, I think you really hit on the big ones, because those are telling you your body is communicating something, right? Some form of stress that's in how it expresses. Well, the other would be the frequency.
Sure. Yeah. Yes, you would sort of loose or constipated. And yeah, frequency and irregularity are usually indications too. Yes.
Thank you for going there with me.
Yes.
we won't dwell on it any longer, but I just it's one of those interesting ones. So the other, like in my world, obviously we're all about health span and longevity, which is really where you're leading into too. And one of them is, I spend a fair bit of my time trying to retrain people around the myths that we believed as truths decades ago, or the myth that we heard last week from media, or even I heard it coming from a CDC senior spokesperson talking about longevity, and I was like, "Are you kidding? You're the ones holding the data, and you don't even know what what your own data is in terms of, and so a good example to talk about is I always use every opportunity to raise up, like, is within the U.S. and certainly in Canada is following on the heels of that. We're in trouble on the longevity front, right? Again, before the days of the pandemic, I've been telling people we've plateaued since 2010. We've now receded to pre-2000 life expectancy. We've gone from being, so in my lifetime, from being 10th ranked in the world on life expectancy, we're now at 56th in the world. Wow. In the meantime, we look at kind of who's made the big moves. Almost every country in the world, almost no country has faltered like the US over that period. And the interesting one is China has gone from a life expectancy of 44 in my lifetime to now surpass the US this year at 78. Right, so these are big movements happening, and I kind of look at it and say there's lots of downside associated with that, but I prefer to flip around and say that says there's tremendous opportunity. Longevity is increasing everywhere else in the world. And so it's really that lens of how we see the world, right? And so I want to kind of go here with how you work with clients, because that to me is like, we've got to look past like who is in our circle of people that we look at, because there are the references that we use to benchmark. How am I feeling? How am I doing relative to what? You know, this term, we're living longer. Well, when are you talking about? Than in 1900? Yes, we're living longer than in 1900. Not living longer than in 2010 or 2000. At least not within the U.S. population. And it's not simply the the socioeconomic factors. That's part of it, but we're clearly looking for benchmarks. And so part of it would be, I guess, like so many challenges that people are facing today, really based on those reference points. And so you talk about stress that they're under. So when you work with clients, kind of how do you deal with those challenges of like, these are the real facts of what you need to be paying attention to, maybe not what's going on, you know, in your news feed or wherever you're getting the information.
And you mean specifically with regards to attitudes around longevity?
Well, I think it's generally around, again, they're coming to you presumably with some wellness issue, and we can talk about that if you like, in terms of with what are clients primarily presenting with.
Sure.
Right. Sure. And then in the context of, like, if we're going to teach people and move them forward, we've got to give them some context of here's where you are today, and it's beyond. We all view ourselves relative to the world around us. So you can't work on the individual without, you know, recognizing the context of the environment that they're in.
Yeah. So back to that idea that, you know, what gets a lot of people's attention are those metabolic biometric tests. So that's a lot of people coming to me. Rising blood sugar, rising blood pressure, you know, poor blood cholesterol levels. Weight is a part of that. You know, it's part of our culture. There's a tangled relationship with that. You see that in our circles. There's a lot of conversations of, do we talk about that? Do we not talk about it? I'd say most of the people that come to me, it's part of their goals. And I think I don't see a representation of our population in terms of readiness to change, because by the time someone's coming to me, they have more readiness to change than the average person, for sure. And they also have more interest in lifestyle medicine than the average person. You'd be surprised, maybe you won't be surprised. I think some listeners might be surprised, the amount of people who tell me, the amount of, because I think there's sort of a perception that the people that are into lifestyle medicine are the fanatics. I sometimes joke that some people think that anyone who works with a wellness coach is the kind of person who has an I Heart Kale t-shirt. And I like to say that my clients are the absolute, you know, they would look like the Chamber of Commerce poster that was trying to represent the every person of the community, right? But they say to me, I think I can do this without medication. You know, the medical professionals are saying, let's do this on medication. But I used to be an exerciser, or I used to be an athlete, or before I had kids, I was in really good. I think I can do this. And there's an interest in their heart in not just the practical reasons for this, the practical reasons being avoiding side effects. There's almost a desire for that, maybe being the most prominent practical reason. There's a desire to for the empowerment. There's a desire for it's that, like, I know I can do this. I kind of have the realization that lifestyle is what led me here, so therefore lifestyle can get me out of here, and I want to do that. Will you help me with that? That's sort of the person that seeks out me for wellness coaching in general. You know, I put myself forward as helping people with metabolic wellness. I also put myself forward as someone who helps people go from having good intentions and knowing what to do to taking action and forming habits. That my kind of client is into that. They're smart. They're generally, and I sometimes have to prove this to a person, because they'll say, I just need more willpower. And I'll say, a person who has 2 doctor's degrees and has raised 3 kids, I think we could prove that you have the willpower. We also could generally prove that they have the knowledge. I think the basic level knowledge around nutrition and exercise has almost become pop culture available. Now, there's a lot of, you know, garbage information. There's a lot of confusion. But I think most people in the United States know that real food trumps food that's been more processed. Most people in the United States know that exercise is generally beneficial. And there's still, there's plenty of people that know all of that and are struggling to make it a part of their lifestyle. And they maybe even, a lot of my clients have had success in fits and starts. And they're aware of that shortcoming. They might think of it as a shortcoming in themselves. It's often a shortcoming in the approaches that they tried. They were sort of designed for short-term success. So does that give a good picture of the kind of person that comes to me?
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. Because I think, and I really love that, and I've never heard anyone say that before. It's lifestyle that got me kind of in trouble, and so why can't it be the thing that I use to get me out? I think that's a great connection.
And said especially without that sort of blaming oneself. It's more of the taking responsibility is generally the spirit, which I think is much more productive from a behavior improvement perspective. Our culture overestimates how much being hard on oneself contributes to motivation. We're much better off having a relationship with ourselves that's more like expecting a lot from, you know, a lot like a parent might have with a student who's in school, like expecting a lot from them, but seeing them as imperfect and making mistakes and stumbling from time to time, and versus the what I might think of as like the figure skating parent or the gymnastics parent that's sort of like a 9.9 is not good enough. Like, and we're not, you're ostracized until you get the 10 kind of thing. A lot of people try to motivate themselves to eat better and exercise with that sort of harsh taskmaster, and it doesn't get them very far. It usually gets them a good 2 or 3 days, and then not much more than that.
Yeah, and then the boomerang hits, and we need to be rewarded for all that sacrifice that we made for that short period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think where you're going with this, and you mentioned a few times now, is is the habits piece, right? So again, I go back to my endurance sport was what the big realization was. It's the habits over time, right? It was no one thing. It was the habit that just developed and got better. Wasn't perfect any day, um, but it's those that start, like I use the investment analogy of it's the small investments starting early that start to compound, and compounding when you have $10 in the bank doesn't look like very much, but over time that compounding really starts to show itself down the road. So when you think about habits, where do you think are the are maybe the ones most difficult, or which are really the ones key to try to get people to key in on?
Well, I look at everyone's unique, and people fall outside of this, but as a working framework for most people, I think it's important to be working on eating habits. It's certainly important to be working on exercise habits. Followed closely or right there with them, sleep and rest, I think are very important. And then less talked about, again, because of that, some tendency for the separation between physical, emotional, and mental. But I also put in that category fulfilling work and fulfilling relationships. We spend an awful lot of our time at work. And that's where the opportunity, that's sort of a way I look at stress, is that stress isn't something to sort of fight. A lower stress life is sort of the natural byproduct of meeting more of our needs more of the time. And we certainly have needs around work and relationships. So I think of those as sort of the big 6 areas to be working in. And what I do with a client is work with them on what they want to work on first. Because what we're looking for is not necessarily what's the physiological keystone, although that's important too, right? If someone is really not getting a lot of sleep, that would be an important thing to consider, that could be a good first step, because getting more sleep will...
It's going to be hard to make progress on anything.
It's going to be hard to make progress on exercise. Your hunger and satiety hormones are out of whack, so it makes your relationship with food challenged, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm also looking for opportunities to have success with habit formation, because that success breeds further success. So if a person is inclined to work on one of those areas first, that often indicates that it's more important to them, that they might actually have a little more confidence in that area already, and there's an opportunity for some success, which comes with what in psychology is talked about as self-efficacy, which is really this simple feeling of, wow, for 2 years, it was hard for me to do that. And in 2 weeks, I'm making some progress. I'm actually doing this. That feeling, and listeners have probably had it with these kind of habits, or with learning a language, or learning an instrument, or starting a business, or creating a course. It feels good to feel like, wow, that felt daunting or felt out of my range of skills, and now I'm seeing that I can do it. That's essentially psychologically contagious. We want some more of that. So I'm looking for opportunities to help a person get that in any of these realms. And then it does tend to snowball or naturally ripple into the other areas over time.
Yeah, you start to develop the belief and the trust, right? The trust in the process, the trust in yourself, a
Yes.
belief that you can do this, that the will, it wasn't really about willpower. It was just, it was around just starting the belief system. How important do you think measurement is associated with that in terms of developing and reinforcing?
I think it's generally very helpful. In the spirit of the saying we hear in businesses and other organizations of something like, what gets measured gets done, I think is a way I often hear it.
Or you can't improve what you can't measure, or what you don't measure. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And so I'm typically seeing someone once a month twice a month or 4 times a month. So every time they're coming back, part of the conversation is, what's going well, what's not going well. And part of that conversation is looking at what we've agreed on for them to be measuring. And so people vary in this. For some people, we have those conversations when they come back for their official 1-hour wellness sessions. Some people are texting me their measurement data weekly, daily, depends on the person. So I think there is a depends on the person kind of quality here, almost like a introversion, extroversion scale. There's people that are like thrive on data, and there are people that thrive on like maybe what we might call more subjective feedback. That seems to work for them or resonate with them. They're still measuring their progress in some way, because our conversations will be things like, how's your sleep? How are your energy levels? How are your stress levels? And they are, by being, asked that question and answering that question, we are measuring something subjectively. So I think it's an important factor. And what I experience is how to use it. Got to be careful to use it in a way that works for the client.
Right. And so do you help clients in terms of facilitate them getting like biomarkers, testing, blood work, or those sort of things as well? Because that's, that whole thing around where do I start? Like what are we starting with?
Often doing that already before they come to me. Early conversations will often, a good example of this, a lot of people come to me that are in the pre-diabetic range. So the blood sugar has been rising and has been rising for some years. And they're trying to get ahead of it before a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. And so they might be on a schedule with their physician or nurse practitioner of having their blood sugar tested every 6 months. And I'll make a suggestion that because you're going to be actively working on influencing this, if your physician is okay with it, you could ask for, let's do this every 3 months as an example. Because what I want for them is more immediate feedback that what they're doing. I don't want them to wait 6 months for the feedback. And these are people that are in a position where they're not taking it at home daily yet, so they would truly be waiting 6 months. And I want them to be able to get some of that feedback sooner.
Yeah, good. If as you think about, or as I think about probably the wide range of clients you must deal with, you must look back on some experiences with just immense pride, right? And in my own coaching experience, kind of those certain things that spark it. And what kind of, what stands out in your mind of, boy, I'm really glad I chose this field of work?
It's funny because I will share an example of a gentleman, but what I really like is that idea that I work with every person, and that person is doing something in the world professionally. They are a parent or a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt or a son or a daughter. They have relationships. And the common trait of someone coming to me is, and this goes back to some of our early questions of sort of wellness being a spectrum from, very sick to fully alive or something like that. These people are typically not very sick yet, but in addition to metabolic biometrics going in the wrong direction, they might describe their life. This is a Zoom metaphor. They might describe their life as being a little muted, a little on mute, or in terms of, or being like a little black and white instead of being in full color. And when people, it's often that medical marker that gets their attention because they know to associate that with potential more severe sickness and shorter life and things like that. But I always work with a client to figure out what their wellness vision is beyond not having high blood sugar. There's always a way to positively state that. There's certain things they want to do. They want to keep teaching. They want to write a book. They want to keep hiking. They want to keep traveling. Those kinds of things, and that's what they get. So this one gentleman, to keep his confidentiality, I'll call him Alex. Early 50s when he came to me, financial advisor. The kind of person that I think many people would have given up on. They would, you see the banter, the less positive banter. I think often well-intentioned banter. I think it comes out of frustration. There will people that will comment on your posts and my posts that will say things like, people just don't care. People are just lazy. People are just ignorant. These kind of things. And I have people, I'm not immune, because it's part of human nature to, to profiling someone based on their initial lifestyle presentation. But I'm repeatedly surprised that under the hood, there is a person that very much wants to be as happy and healthy as they can be, very much is aware that their lifestyle is contributing to their unwellness, and for one reason or another simply hasn't had a good chance to develop the skill set to be living in with more positive habits. And that was certainly this gentleman that I'll call Alex. And so what made working with him satisfying, I think this is really neat in the context of our conversation, is there's a really neat, like, data-driven outcome, and there's a really neat set of psychologically rooted habit outcomes. So we'll start with the first, and I sometimes do a small case study in when I make a presentation, and imagine a chart that shows blood sugar levels. They have them both by fasting blood sugar and glycated hemoglobin. I'll use the fasting blood sugar numbers because I think more people listening are probably familiar with them. So it goes from like 95 to like, I think as high as 300 on this chart, and it's color coded so that less than 100 is green, like a stoplight. That's go. That's where you want to be. And from 200 to 300 is bright red, like a stoplight. This we don't want to be here. And then it's shades in between. And Chris wasn't the top end of that scale, but he was 230, 240. So he was a pretty high level. And I have 3 measurement points for him. So along the lines of, it's something like start 4 months, 8 months. He went from something like 240, 135, 97, something like that.
Wow.
8 months. 8 months is not overnight, but it's not forever either. So of all the metabolic biometrics, blood sugar is generally, in my experience, the most responsive. So it's really neat for someone, because you can imagine that's one thing we're talking about measuring, but he had high blood pressure, he had weight to lose, and those responded as well. But I think because I'm a wellness coach, and because I find the behavior change and habit formation part of this the most satisfying, what's most satisfying is this is a gentleman that at age 52 never had an exercise habit. So that's a mountain to move. This was a person who was the kind of person that you ask, is there any exercise you enjoy? And the one word answer is no. And the parenthesis, the unwritten, the body language is sort of like, how is that possible? So there's that. And then similarly, never really, thought of food, and food is pleasure and enjoyment, but solely thought of food as pleasure and enjoyment, never really thought much about how is my eating affecting my well-being? And he's an interesting one in the context of the more holistic. He was convinced, like, that's what our job is. Let's work on those two things. But by the time we got 3 or 4 months in, because he's gaining some confidence that he can change his life, he can improve his life, and because he started feeling better. We spoke about that earlier, Scott. When we start to feel better, we actually become more sensitive to the things that don't feel good. That idea of noticing that, whoa, I was more tired than I thought I was. He started to look at the stress in his life quite a bit more. So it really became, over a year or year and a half, a very holistic project. And that's satisfying to me, to see someone who most people would dismiss as, that person's not going to be an exerciser, that person's not going to be a nutritious eater, that he's doing things like shopping once a week for nutritious food, keeping his office fridge stocked, keeping his home fridge stocked. That he's now, he by 4 or 5 months in, he's up to exercising 4 times a week, 45 minutes. I think he got all the way up to 4 times a week, an hour, plus doing some some casual walking, plus playing some golf. He's the kind of person now who exercises, who it's part of his life. I will say he never got to the point of loving exercise beyond golf, which was something he loved coming in. And he wouldn't have considered exercise. He would take the cart, so he really didn't consider it much exercise. He never got to the point of loving it, but he got to the point of it being an important part of his day that he knew made his moods better. It wasn't just a means to an end in terms of keeping his blood sugar levels down and his blood pressure down. It also became a relatively enjoyable part of his day.
Yeah, it's the other one I just want to touch on is environment. And when I talk about environment, I'm talking around the social aspects of generally who we're interfacing with over the course of a day. And name any of these areas and say, how does the environment, is it promoting or is it challenging you, right? So I'm sure you have ways of trying to deal with that, but one of the risks is a bunch of us can all sit around, we all nod our heads, we're in agreement, which isn't terrible, but what it does do is it provides reinforcement of where we place ourselves consciously in supportive environments. I, being the scientist, will also place myself in environments that are very challenging because I want to learn still from those other people, but I recognize there's quite a difference, right? And so I think that's the one I'm sure you spend time on, trying to figure out how to help people navigate from the environment that they know to the environment that's going to be much more supportive and help their success, right?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. One of the things a wellness coach provides is an infusion of a positive, supportive person in the wellness realms. But that's not a permanent solution. The person is going to go home and live with other people and go to work and interact with other people. And yes, one of the ways to make these kind of improvements sticky and last, and so we'll do some of it right from the beginning and do a lot more of it as we go on, is to work on, who are the kind of people you want to be having lunch with when it's a lunch break at work, and how can you take what's there that's already helpful and amplify it, and how can you start to add to it. We are very, very much products of our environment, and there's generally more we can do to make our environment work for us than we sometimes give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, I use the analogy of kind of, I use like the New York kind of everybody moving down the sidewalk. It's a lot easier to go with the direction people are going. But
that's right.
If they're going to the place that you really don't want to be, then you've got to somehow extract yourself out there and look around and figure out, so which is the flow that I want to be in, right? Because everything wants to pull us in the direction, and that's kind of going back to the top of this challenge around kind of where we are on health in the country right now.
I
we've
think
got to be
I want,
cognizant of that.
yes, there's something very important to touch on there because, and this is there's several entire other conversations that we've sort of only touched on. I think one thing that could make the concept of the psychology of behavior change and habit formation and in the idea of working with a wellness coach make a little bit more sense for people, because psychology, the way it is, it's softer than other sciences. It's harder to quantify, and it's harder to grasp how exactly it works. But it's very easy to explain behavior change and habit formation with terms like friction and resistance, inertia and momentum. That's really what we're playing with. And we're really looking at how can we add some energy to the system to get the object moving, in this case, to get the person doing something different than they're doing. And then how do we remove frictions from their environment that could stop the object from moving? That makes it a lot more tangible for people, that it's not just mindset and having a good attitude. It's playing on, I'll sometimes say it's leveraging these very deep, very powerful aspects of human nature and helping them to work for us instead of against us. And the whole idea of setting up your environment is a big part of this.
Yeah, it's and again, of all these things, you're not likely to do that in a day or a week, right? It's a process of trying to say, where are we trying to get someone from where they are today? At first, that honest awareness of what is it really versus what am I telling you that I want you to believe, right? And kind of working through all that. And so we all deal with that ourselves in our own self-talk, right? Most of us don't live in the real world anyway. We live in the self-talk of how we want the world to see us, or how we would like to be seen, how we would like to imagine things to be. That's normal, right? But we just have to kind of try to at least get it closer to reality if we're really living or fighting against some other direction.
Absolutely.
Well, Jason, this is I've looked forward to this conversation for so long, and I'm so glad that we've had a chance to have it. I know you're in the wellness space, you are probably the busiest guy that I know, and that's a credit to you, and obviously the people that have chosen to work with you. So thank you so much for taking time with our audience. What's the I'll put a link to the website and things. That's the best way for people to reach out to you, or you probably don't want them all calling you right away as soon as they get this?
Well, I certainly do a good job on my own side of boundarying things, so I would welcome anyone to call, with a question. But I think I'm in the process of redoing all of my online presence. So what is working right now, where I've sort of almost like if someone were building a new home, they'd have the place they're staying in while the project is being done. The place I'm staying in with my online presence is LinkedIn. So if people simply look me up on LinkedIn, my full name, Jason Gootman, which is Goodman, but with a T instead of a D, they'll find me and have access. I post almost daily something that I think people will find. My aim is to provide things that are both inspiring but practical, useful. And then people can contact me through there if they have questions or want to talk more.
And they'll immediately be part of a very positive, informed community if they follow you on LinkedIn too. So that's one of, you've got a great group of followers. I just think you do a great job there. So that's where we connected first. So thanks so much, Jason. Best of luck with obviously getting the new presence set up, but thanks for the work that you do. I think it's really important, and it's going to be more important, I think, in the years going forward. So thank you so much.
I will say the same things back to you, and I'm looking forward to continuing conversation, the relationship, and other potential collaborations.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can sit down and do this again, and we'll get into the weeds on poop or something.
That sounds great, Scott.
Okay, have a great day.
You too.